The rain fell in sheets over Lagos, turning the city's pulse into a blur of headlights and car horns. Outside the secluded facade of the Azure Crest Hotel, a fortress of glass and steel tucked away from the bustle, Ethan Cole stepped into the storm. Dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, his silver hair slicked back by the downpour, he moved briskly toward the idling armoured SUV. The air was thick with humidity and unease. Suddenly, chaos shattered the moment. A black van screeched to a halt by the curb. 4 masked men in black tactical gear emerged, weapons raised. Screams erupted from passers-by and hotel staff. "Mr. Cole, get back!" someone shouted, but it was too late. The kidnappers converged with military precision. One grabbed Ethan's arm, yanking him backward. Another raised a pistol to his driver's head. The billionaire struggled, more out of reflex than hope. Then, an interruption so unexpected, it jarred the scene like a cracked mirror. A barefoot boy, no older than 13, burst from the alley across the road. Rain clung to his skinny frame, his oversized t-shirt plastered to his skin. Without hesitation, he let out a shrill cry and hurled a stone that struck one of the kidnappers square in the temple. The man cursed, spinning. The boy darted forward and, from a pile of discarded wood by the roadside, yanked a broken plank. He swung it with all his weight, catching another assailant off balance. The chaos gave the SUV driver just enough of an opening. He lunged, grabbing Ethan and pulling him away as bullets cracked into the pavement. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Closer, closer. The kidnappers scrambled, retreating toward their van. Ethan stumbled back into the SUV, chest heaving, eyes wide. As the vehicle peeled away, his gaze locked onto the boy, now standing in the middle of the street, trembling, his lip bleeding, his eyes full of fire and fear. He didn't run, not yet. They stared at each other, the billionaire and the barefoot child, 2 strangers bridged by violence and rain. Then, without a word, the boy turned and vanished into the shadows of the slum that loomed across the road, an endless tangle of corrugated roofs and flickering lights. Ethan pressed his palm to the foggy window, breath shallow, his voice barely a whisper, almost to himself, but firm with intent. Find that boy. Ethan Cole sat in silence at the edge of his glass-walled penthouse, the skyline of Lagos flickering beyond like 1,000 blinking warnings. The near kidnapping had stirred something old and buried, something he had spent years keeping locked behind polished boardroom doors and staged philanthropic galas. The face of the boy who saved him wouldn't leave his mind. His name came quickly, Joshua Ume. Ethan's security team, efficient and relentless, had tracked him within hours to a dense cluster of corrugated rooftops, in a part of town Ethan hadn't set foot in for decades. Not since before the money, before the app that made him a billionaire. That app, Kasua Pay, revolutionized mobile banking across West Africa and brought financial access to millions. But success had come at a cost. His marriage dissolved under the weight of his obsession, and his daughter Claire had turned her back on him entirely. She held him responsible for her mother's slow spiral into depression and the pills that finally silenced her pain. And maybe she wasn't wrong. Ethan had buried himself in deals and development, in code and capital, while the people closest to him fractured like glass under pressure. Now he lived alone, surrounded by security guards and silence, lauded in public and empty in private. Philanthropy had become his camouflage. Schools, hospitals, charities, all bearing his name, but touching nothing real inside him. Meanwhile, in the thick, rain-stained maze of Ajagunle, Joshua Ume rinsed blood from his knuckles in a plastic basin outside the one-room shack he shared with his mother, Amaka, and his little sister, Kioma. The plank he'd used still leaned against the wall, cracked. Inside, a single kerosene lamp flickered as Amaka hunched over her sewing machine, her fingers blistered and eyes red from fatigue. She stitched school uniforms for children she could never afford to send alongside her own. Joshua sat beside her quietly, holding the fabric taut as she worked. He didn't speak much about what happened, but the bruises on his arm and the raw scrape along his jaw had said enough. Amaka looked at him, her voice gentle but firm, the same words she told him every night, like armor. Never owe a man what you can repay with honor. Joshua believed her. After his father had been wrongfully accused of theft and died in prison without trial, he learned early that justice was rarely blind. It just refused to look down. Since then, He watched every rich car that passed with a glare, taught himself how to disappear into alleyways, how to listen, how to survive. The rich were always looking for something to own. But that day when he saw the gun raised and the panic on Ethan's face, instinct overrode everything. He hadn't done it for thanks. When Ethan's men first appeared outside their shack, SUVs humming, security guards flanking a well-dressed aide, Joshua stood in front of his mother, shoulders squared, daring them to come closer. The aide offered a thick envelope of cash and praised the boy's bravery. Amaka looked at the money, then at her son, and shook her head. "Keep your money," she said calmly. "If you want to thank him, give him a future." Surprised, the aide relayed her message to Ethan directly. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something stir in him, curiosity. That kind of refusal wasn't just rare, it was raw, unbending, real. He agreed to sponsor Joshua, offering him a full scholarship to one of Nigeria's most elite private schools. Uniforms, books, transport, meals, everything. He told himself it was just an act of gratitude, nothing more. A week later, under a morning sun that cut through the slums like hope, a uniformed driver stepped out of a glossy black SUV, holding a neatly folded set of school clothes. Joshua stood outside the shack in frayed shorts, speechless as the package was placed in his hands. His mother wept softly, not from sadness, but from the kind of pride that hurt. Joshua hugged her tightly, hiding his face in her shoulder. Behind them, Kioma clapped and danced in circle. Across the street, Ethan sat in the back of his car, watching through tinted glass. The boy, the mother, the crumbling home, they stirred something Ethan couldn't name yet. He didn't know it in that moment, but this simple gesture, the handoff of a uniform, was the beginning of a redemption he didn't know he needed, and a relationship that would unearth everything he thought he'd buried. 2 months after the near kidnapping, the rhythm of life had subtly shifted for both Ethan Cole and the Ume family. Joshua, now in crisp uniforms and leather shoes, had become one of the top-performing students at Queen's Crest Academy. His teachers praised not only his intelligence, but his quiet discipline and fierce sense of justice. Meanwhile, Ethan, still reclusive to the public, found himself visiting the slums more than his boardroom. He came without security, parking his car discreetly at the edge of the neighborhood. At first, it was to check on Joshua's progress, but soon it became more. He brought colorful fabrics for Amaka, who insisted on sewing him a shirt in return, and tiny gifts for Kioma, a doll here, a pair of school shoes there. He sat on their stool outside the shack, sipping cold malt drinks and listening to the soft rhythmic chatter of a life he'd never known. It felt strangely healing. Then came the dinner invitation. Ethan, feeling unusually hopeful, asked Amaka and the children to join him at his Ikoyi estate for an evening meal. Amaka was hesitant, but Joshua urged her. He wanted to see where the man lived, who somehow was beginning to feel like more than a sponsor. That evening, the Umes arrived, dressed modestly but proudly. Amaka wore a hand-sewn dress, her hair tied in a colourful scarf. Joshua stood tall in his school uniform, and Kioma giggled as she marvelled at the chandeliers. The estate was opulent, sprawling with manicured lawns and marble floors. Another world entirely. But it wasn't the splendour that caused the night to unravel. It was Claire. She had returned from a trip abroad unannounced, her high heels echoing sharply through the marble hall as she entered the dining room. Her eyes scanned the table, pausing on the Umes, confusion turning quickly to contempt. The dinner passed tensely, Claire silent and tight-lipped, until after dessert, when she pulled her father aside into the study. The door slammed behind them. "What the hell is this, Dad?" she snapped. "Is this your new family? Is this how you grieve now, inviting slum seamstresses and her perfect little hero into Mum's house?" Ethan tried to speak, but Claire wouldn't stop. "You think this makes you a good man now, buying uniforms and parading them around like pets? You're replacing her with this woman, like Mom never existed." Ethan's face flushed, his voice breaking for the first time in years. "That's not what this is. You don't know them." Claire's eyes burned. "No, you don't know what you're doing." She stormed out, brushing past Amaka without a glance. The silence left behind was suffocating, but the real blow came the next morning. An anonymous blog post, slickly written and cruelly titled, had gone viral overnight. Billionaire coal dating woman who saved his life with her son meets her in secret. It included a photo of Ethan exiting the slum, the time and date stamped. Speculation spiraled, painting Amaka as a gold digger, Ethan as a pathetic old widower, and Joshua as a street-smart orphan strategically placed. By noon, news channels were echoing the gossip. Ethan's PR team scrambled, but the damage was done. That afternoon, without warning, uniformed officers from social services arrived at Queen's Crest Academy. They pulled Joshua from class under the claim of ensuring the child's welfare amidst potential domestic manipulation. Confused and terrified, Joshua was taken away. The school, under pressure from board members, suspended him indefinitely, pending investigation. Ethan was blindsided. His legal team raced to catch up, but they couldn't pinpoint the source of the leak. The post had been planted too precisely, too personal. It wasn't random. That evening, alone in his study, Ethan reviewed the metadata his cybersecurity firm extracted from the blog's upload log. One flagged connection stood out. The anonymous tip had originated from a location matching one of his home IPs, specifically the guest house Wi-Fi. His jaw clenched. Only one person had been staying there recently, Claire. The backlash hit like a storm Amaka never saw coming. In the days following the viral post, her quiet corner of Ajagunle became a battleground of whispers and side glances. The same women who once admired her strength now crossed the road when they saw her. Clients stopped calling. Orders were cancelled. Tailoring contracts she'd scraped to build fell apart as parents pulled out, unwilling to have their children wear clothes sewn by a seductress. Online tabloids ran with headlines laced in venom, from slum to socialite, the seamstress who stole a billionaire's heart. Pictures of Amaka outside Ethan's estate were framed as evidence of manipulation. Commenters dug up every public record they could find, twisting fragments into accusations. Amaka, once proud and stoic, found herself retreating from her own doorstep. Joshua, too, faced his own crucifixion. The once-admired scholarship kid became a walking target. "Gold digger's son," they jeered in the hallways of Queen's Crest. His classmates whispered behind his back, some even filming him at recess, mocking his clothes, his accent, his charity status. One teacher, under her breath, called him the PR kid. When Joshua shoved a boy who called his mother a whore, it was all the school board needed. He was expelled. No warning, no hearing, just a letter. Ethan's lawyers reached out immediately, threatening lawsuits, drafting damage control, but it all felt cold, mechanical. Ethan himself never showed up. No call, no apology, no statement of support. He sent payments, not presents. Press releases, not protection. Joshua couldn't take it anymore. He showed up unannounced at Ethan's glass tower office, storming past the receptionist and into the boardroom mid-meeting. His voice cracked, but rang through the polished marble like a thunderclap. "Why are you hiding like I'm your shame?" Everyone froze. Ethan dismissed the room, but the echo of Joshua's words lingered long after. Alone, Ethan tried to explain. He said he was handling it, that he was protecting them. Joshua shook his head. "You're protecting yourself. You're still afraid of what they'll say if they see you with us. But I wasn't afraid when I saw you in that rain. I stood by you. You ran behind lawyers." The final blow came days later, when a new wave of scandal broke, a document leak from Claire. It showed that 15 years ago, Amaka had taken out a loan under a false name, desperate to pay for her husband's legal fees during his wrongful imprisonment. Claire's post twisted it into proof of fraud, branding Amaka a liar who had always manipulated the system. The backlash was instant. A video went viral showing Amaka breaking down at a public market, pleading with a customer who refused to pay her for a delivery. Her scarf fell off, her voice cracked, and she collapsed in tears. That night, she packed away her sewing machine. When Ethan visited, she didn't open the door. She called through the wood. "Stay away, Mr. Cole. You've done enough." Ethan stood there, rain falling again, just like the night it all began. But this time, he was powerless. Alone in his estate, he finally confronted Claire, who had returned to the guest wing with a hard-set jaw and cold silence. But he'd had enough. He told her everything, about her mother's affair, about how he had discovered it, but stayed silent for Claire's sake, letting the world believe their marriage fell apart from neglect. about the guilt that had slowly eaten away at her mother, until one night she took the pills and didn't wake up. Claire stood motionless. Her mouth opened, then closed. The certainty she had clung to for years, of Ethan being the villain, crumbled under the weight of truth. For the first time in years, her anger gave way to something else: confusion, grief, shame. By then, Joshua had vanished. He had packed a small bag and slipped out before dawn, leaving behind only a note. "You say you care, but the world you live in is killing us." Amaka was frantic, but refused to call the police. Too many memories of what happened to her husband. Days passed. Ethan used every resource he had: private investigators, neighborhood informants, but the city swallowed boys like Joshua easily. Then, breaking news. A late-night robbery had gone wrong at a corner shop in Surulere. 3 teens had been arrested, one of them identified as Joshua Ume. A video showed him standing outside the shop, running in after hearing a gunshot. Ethan arrived at the police station in a panic, his heart pounding with a fear he couldn't intellectualize or buy his way out of. Inside a small, cold room, he found Joshua bruised, one eye swollen shut, wrists cuffed to a chair. But it was the expression on the boy's face, terror barely hidden behind clenched teeth, that shattered something deep in Ethan. This wasn't a kid in trouble. This was a child who had been failed by society, by justice, by him. And Ethan finally understood. This wasn't about gratitude or guilt or even redemption anymore. This was about standing up out loud for someone when it mattered. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension as camera flashes flickered outside like lightning before a storm. Ethan Cole sat at the front beside his legal team, face drawn but determined. Beside him, Amaka's hands trembled in her lap, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights. Joshua, clad in an oversized court-issued shirt, sat silently between his public defender and a uniformed officer. The trial had gripped the city. Media dubbed it the billionaire's boy, spinning tales of a slum kid who rose too high and fell too hard. The prosecutor leaned hard into the narrative, painting Joshua as a cunning street rat who had fooled the nation's elite and was now returning to his roots: crime. Each accusation felt like a lash, and Ethan flinched with every word, knowing his silence had helped pave this road. Amaka took the stand, and the courtroom stilled. Her voice quivered but held. "My son is not perfect," she began, tears welling. "But 2 months ago, he saw a man being taken at gunpoint, and he ran towards the danger. He saved a life. Where is that same courage now? Where is the world he saved when he needs saving?" Her voice cracked, and a hush fell. Some looked away, others wiped their eyes. The weight of her pain was undeniable. Then, unexpectedly, the doors opened, and Claire entered. Her heels clicked down the aisle, each step louder than the last. She looked every inch the heiress the world knew, but her voice, when she addressed the court, carried something different: vulnerability. "I once believed this family didn't belong," she said clearly, facing the judge. "I thought they were exploiting my father, but the truth is, I exploited my grief. I weaponized it, and in doing so, I nearly destroyed a family that only ever showed love." Murmurs filled the room. Claire turned to Joshua. "I don't know if saying sorry will ever be enough, but I'll say it anyway." Just when the trial seemed poised to crumble under emotional weight, Ethan's legal team revealed a final piece of evidence: newly uncovered CCTV footage from a nearby ATM machine. It showed the moment of the robbery, the chaos, the scuffle, and clearly, Joshua pulling another boy out of the fight, shielding him from a panicked shopkeeper's stray bullet. He wasn't the attacker. He had tried to stop it. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The prosecutor deflated. The judge reviewed the footage, then the testimonies, then leaned forward and delivered the words everyone had been aching to hear. "The court finds Joshua Ume not guilty. All charges dismissed." Outside, the media surged, but none of it mattered. On the courthouse steps, Amaka broke down in relief. Claire, without hesitation, moved to her and embraced her tightly. 2 women who had once stood on opposite sides now clinging to each other in quiet forgiveness. Reporters shouted questions, but Ethan tuned them out. He approached Joshua slowly, as if approaching something sacred. His voice cracked with emotion as he knelt before the boy, his pride discarded like armor. "I failed you," he whispered. not just in court, in everything. I thought I could fix things with money, with schools, with lawyers. But I see now, I was just watching from the sidelines. I'm not here to sponsor your life. I'm here to be part of it, if you'll let me. Joshua stared at him for a long, breathless moment. No words, just the sound of cameras clicking and Amaka's quiet sobs. And then, slowly, Joshua stepped forward and pulled Ethan into a tight, silent hug. A year later, the city of Lagos buzzed with a different kind of energy, a quieter hope, born not from headlines, but from healing. Amaka stood in the center of her new tailoring studio, light pouring in through wide glass windows, laughter echoing from women sewing at workstations bearing her name. Her brand, Kioma Threads, had grown from a one-woman hustle to a thriving enterprise, backed by a bold new initiative, the Mother's Rise Fund, created by Ethan to invest in female entrepreneurs from low-income communities. Amaka didn't just employ women, she mentored them. And when reporters came, she didn't talk about Ethan or scandal. She talked about strength, dignity, and the price of survival. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Joshua stood on the stage of a prestigious prep school in Massachusetts. His accent sharp, his voice steady. He wore a fitted blazer and a quiet confidence that lit the room. He was delivering the keynote at the launch of the Ume Foundation for Street Kids, a joint initiative led by Ethan and Claire, designed to support vulnerable children in Lagos with housing, education, and mentorship. I don't stand here because someone gave me a handout, Joshua told the crowd, scanning the rows of powerful donors. I stand here because someone believed I was worth standing beside. Applause filled the auditorium. Not polite, but thunderous. Claire now ran the foundation full-time. The sharpness she once wielded as a weapon had softened into purpose. She spent her days meeting with social workers, drafting policy reform proposals, and reviewing grant applications from places she once wouldn't have stepped into. She and Amaka, once estranged by suspicion and pain, now texted often, laughed easily. Ethan and Claire were healing too, slowly, carefully, with therapy, hard truths, and the kind of vulnerability money couldn't shortcut. They spoke not just of the past, but of who they still wanted to become. But the most powerful moment came on a humid afternoon in Lagos, when Joshua returned to the alley where it all began. The shack was gone now, torn down in a city redevelopment project, but the street remained, the air still thick with motor oil, roasted corn, and distant music. Children played with plastic bottles and makeshift kites, shouting when they saw him. "Big bro, Josh!" they cried, running up with wide eyes and bare feet. He knelt to meet them, his smile warm but grounded. One small boy tugged at his sleeve, asking, "How did you get out?" Joshua looked at him gently, then glanced down the alley where he once stood bleeding and defiant. "You don't need to be rich to change the world," he said softly. "Just brave." And as the children gathered close, listening like they were hearing a new kind of story, the rain began to fall again, not with violence, but with grace. The late afternoon light spilled gently through the windows of Ethan's study, casting long, golden shadows across the polished floors. He sat alone in his armchair, a steaming cup of tea in hand, watching the television screen mounted on the far wall. The segment was brief, but powerful. Joshua Ume standing proudly at a podium in Cape Town, accepting the African Teen Humanitarian of the Year award. Cameras flashed as he spoke with poise and humility, crediting his mother, his community, and the people who stood by him. Ethan's eyes glistened, not with pride, but with something deeper, gratitude, awe. Claire stepped into the room, folding her arms as she watched the final seconds of the segment. Without looking at her, Ethan spoke, his voice quiet but certain. "I thought I was saving him, but he saved us all." Across the city, Amaka sat at her sewing machine, soft gospel music drifting through the room as she stitched the final hem of a school uniform. The air was calm, the chaos of the past a ghost that no longer haunted. Kioma giggled in the next room, and the smell of jollof rice simmering on the stove filled the house with warmth. Amaka reached into her drawer for a needle and paused, her fingers brushing the edge of a worn photo. She pulled it out gently. 4 smiling faces beamed back at her. Joshua in his suit, Claire with her arm around Kioma, and Ethan, eyes crinkled with an unguarded joy she'd once doubted he possessed. Amaka held the photo close, closed her eyes, and whispered, "God, thank you for the stone my son threw that day." Her voice was barely audible, but it carried the weight of everything they'd survived. The machine hummed back to life, fade out,